This meeting is being recorded.
Today we have Leif Cocks, founder of Wildlife Conservation International, joining us. Under this organization, Leif has also founded Wildlife Asia, International Elephant Project, Forest for People, and International Tiger Project, which is what we're here to speak about today. Leif is also vice president of the Orang Utan Republic Foundation, and he began his career as a zookeeper, curator, and small population biologist. Leif has worked hands-on with orangutans for over 30 years. He's highly regarded as a world-renowned expert on orangutans and has authored a number of books, including Finding Our Humanity and Orangutans, My Friends, My Cousins. In 2019, Leif was awarded the Order of Australia Medal from the Australian government and his university's highest award, the John Curtin Medal, for his dedication to species conservation. Welcome, Leif. It's an honor to have you here today. Thank you for taking time out. And I'm so glad we were able to work out our schedule. It took us some time, but you're on the other side of the planet, right?
Yeah. Literally on the opposite side of the planet. Yeah. So thank you.
Well, it's great to have you here. So we'll just jump right in then. And so you've worked for over 30 years with wildlife, and including with the Sumatran tigers. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit today about how you got started in this line of work, and did you know from a young age that you wanted to do this type of noble work, really, is what I would call it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always kind of had an affinity with animals and a desire to work with them. So, so that's kind of been, I guess, a constant theme of my life. And certainly I guess in starting originally out on this work, we were always intending the conservation work to support all biodiversity, all animals, and humanity as well under a holistic project. And the International Tiger Project is our attempt to bring one of the most vulnerable species, the Sumatran tiger, under that holistic protection, because they've really got their backs against the wall at the moment, as far as being able to pull their species back from the brink of extinction.
Yeah, that's really upsetting. And I'm so glad that you're out there doing this work, because we need you and others like you to be championing this this work and protecting our delicate wildlife. So you had started out as a zookeeper. So I just wanted to ask you kind of a little bit of an interesting question before we jump more into the tiger conservation. And so I was wondering if you could just share with us a little bit about what that work was like, and maybe your views on the industry, perhaps how it was then versus today, and whether or not your views on that has changed at all, your views on the industry.
Mm-hmm. As you said, I worked in the zoo industry for 25 years. 12 of those years, very exclusively, as a zookeeper, then a curator, a supervisor, director, and other positions within the zoo. And it's the zoo industry in large is, I guess you hope, is in a state of evolution from a menagerie to a zoo to a conservation park. And of course, like all industries, they exist in their own bubble, their own cult, as it were, and often don't really have an accurate perception of who they are and what they're doing. So one of the questions is for example, is is it justified to keeping animals in captivity in a zoo? And at least from what the zoo industry tells us, is certainly not justified. They talk about awareness and education being justifications for keeping animals in a zoo, and also that they're holding backup populations of critically endangered species such as tigers and elephants and orangutans, and that's not true either. zoo populations are unsustainable and will collapse eventually. So it may be difficult to save them in the wild, but it's impossible to save them in captivity. Now, that doesn't mean that zoos potentially could hold a range of species which do well in captivity and can happily live in a zoo environment. But that's not necessarily the collection, the legacy collection that zoos have at the moment. So it certainly has to be rationalized, because some animals which are held currently in zoos aren't suitable for captivity, and should be phased out. But to move to the next stage of evolution, to be conservation parks, there have to be genuine shop fronts for conservation work, connecting people with real action. So it's like with any industry, it's far easier to talk and far easier to, in a sense, whitewash the issues, and and to be seen to be doing good. It's very hard to do the real thing, but it's certainly possible, and certainly zoos have the potential to evolve to be conservation parks that um, display animals which are suitable for captivity, connect people to them, yeah, and help fund and support genuine on-the-ground conservation work, and be that connection for humanity.
Right. Thank you for sharing that, your experience and your thoughts on it. And I just wanted to see, I don't want to make this show about that, but you be having that in your background, I thought it was worth the mention. And so, well, the next thing I was wondering we could maybe talk about is threats. The main threats to the Sumatran tigers, and as I understand it, the threats are very similar to other endangered species today, which is loss of habitat and the human, non-human animal conflict among the poaching end of things, which we can get to. But I wanted to ask, your organization's mission is said to promote the survival of tigers in their natural habitat by undertaking genuine, measurable, and effective tiger conservation. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that work and what that entails.
Mm-hmm. Look, our first goal would be is to protect large tracts of viable ecosystems of the right type, shape, and size of rainforest, where Sumatran tigers can live in sustainable populations, and therefore the species can survive. Although this may be true for a lot of species, it's simply no longer possible for the Sumatran tiger, among others. In other words, even if we get our fantasy situation of conserving the viable ecosystems that won't ecologically collapse and can hold significant populations, none of those ecosystems in our grandchildren's lifetime, at least, will ever be able to hold a single Sumatran tiger population that would be genetically viable to hold that species in the future. So what are we left with? We're left with tigers, small numbers of tigers in isolated rainforest ecosystems that we're, over the next 10 years, got the ability with enough resources to conserve these ecosystems intact and viable. But each one of those subpopulations in itself is not viable. So we have to then manage the entire Sumatran tiger population as a mega population, which basically means when the male tigers leave the territory and then obviously are involved with human tiger conflict on the edge of the ecosystem, that we have to capture those male tigers and transfer them to the next ecosystem, and basically become the genetic vectors in an artificial way to secure all the different subpopulations, which is very unfortunate. And this is also the same with elephants. We no longer have the capacity in the foreseeable future to allow them to completely live in the wild. And unfortunately, tigers have a double-edged sword. The primary issue of loss of habitat is obviously critical to tigers and all the species that share their habitat. But they have a couple of other issues. They have obviously they are large, carnivore. And therefore the human-tiger conflict is critical because people are frightened of them. And of course, if you have two frightened beings who are competing over the same forest, it's unfortunately the tiger which is likely to die in the process. But unfortunately also that they're extremely valuable in the Chinese medicine trade and for parts of such as their fur. So what we found is there were criminal syndicates going and deliberately poaching the tigers. And they're the same criminal syndicates that run the drugs and the guns. Obviously, the skills of drug running and gun running and endangered species parts running is actually the same skill set. So they undertake those same opportunities. So very dangerous people who are seeking to kill off the last remaining tigers for monetary gain. But the additional problem we've had actually quite relatively recently is swine flu. Swine flu is devastating the wild pig population in Sumatra as it goes through the different ecosystems. And pigs are the primary food source for the Sumatran tiger. And then, so therefore they're starving. They can't find enough prey, which is increasing the human-tiger conflict. And we've had 2 of our ranges attacked by tigers, and we've had to protect children going to school from tigers exiting the rainforest ecosystems. So we are going through this extremely critical time for the Sumatran tiger to bring them through this extinction crisis and then manage them as a mega population. Of course, one day, our final hope in many generations, that in order to secure the planet to mitigate climate change to the extent that we need to, we'll be rewilding 25% of the planet. And we hope that includes tiger habitat, so one day they can live without human intervention in viable populations.
Wow, that's a really complicated answer. I mean, not just the answer, but the actual process of helping them and making sure that they can survive. And it's just, it's a lot. You're actually like working on moving them. Is that part of, did I understand that correctly? You move them from one area
Well,
to
it's actually kind of very interesting. One of the key things we have to do with these ecosystems is make sure there's at least some tigers there. Because if once tigers go extinct in the area, social politically, it's almost impossible to reintroduce them. No community or government will risk you reintroducing a large killing machine into the environment where humans are living. And so, first of all, we've got to make sure that even if there's 1 or 2, we maintain them there in the first place for social political reasons. But then, of course, we want them to protect them with anti-poaching units and preventing human-elephant conflict and reducing the poaching of their prey, which is just as important as reducing poaching on them themselves, because they need the prey to survive, and humans will often want to poach the same animals to eat if not protected. So then we have what we call a viable subpopulation. Now, they basically will inbreed into extinction if we just did that alone. So the best possibility then is when male tigers are displaced from an ecosystem and normally would then move through rainforest to find other territories away from the natal territory to breed and prosper. They're obviously now facing a sea of monoculture of human-dominated landscapes where they're easily killed. And so our task is then to capture these conflict tigers, put them in a crate, and there's a couple of options. One is to send them to a zoo, which is kind of a genetic dead end, which means that they're kind of lost to their species. And obviously the best welfare outcome is for them to live free in the wild. So our goal is to then ship them to a neighboring ecosystem where they become a genetic contribution to a new population and be able to survive in the wild. So it's a reasonably complex issue. And it's one of the things which is kind of annoying about communication about conservation issues. Us as humans, we love simplistic answers, that you have to sit, but I always say for every complex problem in the world, there's a simple answer which is absolutely wrong. Unfortunately, the reality of preserving tigers and many other species is complex and multifaceted.
Yes, definitely. I can see that. And we're just talking about one species. So I can only imagine what's, how the complexity and of protecting wildlife around the planet. Doing this work, I talk to a lot of different people about these different, subjects, and it's daunting. We try not to get too overwhelmed by it, don't we? But it is
Yeah, we're lucky that many species will fit under the umbrella of a large megafauna conservation. So the idea is under umbrella conservation. If you conserve the large megafauna, such as orangutans or tigers or elephants, then they will go along for the free ride. You don't have to pay too much attention if you're protecting the habitat and preventing poaching. But what we quickly found when we're developing is there was species slipping outside the umbrella and the specific actions on top of the generic habitat protection actions. And those were tigers, elephants, and human beings, the indigenous communities, which were also falling outside the umbrella. And that's why we started sister projects to bring all living beings under the umbrella of our conservation efforts.
I love that because we are all one and it does all matter. All these pieces fit together and you can't just leave one part of it out. Otherwise it does not work. So, and I'd love to talk more about that later on if we can and we have time, maybe even jump onto another episode to do that. But one thing that interests me a great deal and troubles me is the third and major threat to wildlife, to the Sumatran tigers, is what you mentioned, is the poaching and illegal trade of wildlife parts. And this industry is worth billions of dollars annually. Yet the lack of law enforcement and weak penalties that are given to these perpetrators of these wildlife crimes does leave this species vulnerable like many others. And so I wanted to ask, how does any conservation organization really effectively combat such a lucrative industry that is a dangerous and dark underworld? And typically gets a pass from many governments, don't they? And that's part of we're talking about power and money, and it's an age-old story, age-old problem around the world, and it's becoming more and more problematic. So what do you do? What do we do?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question because, public servants or governments all around the world, it's, if a elephant or a tiger, is killed or displaced, it's not a big blot on your resume. But if somebody gets killed, a human, then suddenly, your job is under threat. They're always especially with a large carnivore, they're always going to naturally favor as being, let's say, the killing of tigers and in human-tiger conflict as a victimless crime. It doesn't really affect them, even though it's driving a critically endangered species to extinction. That extinction will occur over many, many years outside the lifespan of your average politician with their 5-year vision. And so it's very hard to get the priority. Now, with the criminal syndicates, it's hard because these people will kill you. They're not nice people, and therefore, why risk in life and limb to save a tiger? It doesn't seem to be of much value in that sense. Now, the conjoining of issues, which for governments, people, and tigers, as I may have mentioned before, these people who are running the illegal pet trade are the same people running guns to terrorists, and drugs to innocent people. And so international and national agencies who are truly interested, in protecting people and sovereign governments should also be interested in these criminal syndicates because they are the same people.
So I hope that becomes more prevalent with these agencies and really taking an interest in doing that. I'm sure that, I mean, I have seen more work in terms of investigations going on just doing this work. You hear about it. So I hope that becomes, more of a priority, I guess. Well, how do you fund such a massive undertaking like International Tiger Project? Where do your donors mainly come from, and how can our audience help? How can we help?
Yeah, our funding comes from donors, private donors who give us money, either small regular gifts or large gifts, in order for us to continue this work. And we've got chapters in New Zealand, Australia, Canada, US, and the European Union. And all combined, we try with all our different international chapters to bring in enough money to achieve the outcomes that we want to do to conserve the rainforest, and in this particular instance, the Sumatran tiger. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's money is a rate determining step, which is reducing our ability to enact the level of conservation that we would like to do for the Sumatran tiger. So I do spend a lot of my time doing talks and connecting with people to inspire people to help the Sumatran tiger and bring it back from the brink of extinction, because without effective immediate help over the next decade, the Sumatran tiger will be lost to humanity. We've already lost the Javan tiger, we've already lost the Bali tiger, and the next species of tiger, which is in the crosshairs, is Sumatran tiger. And we'd like to have been able to do enough in this most important decade of human history, where to determine the future of the planet through climate change and the future of viable ecosystems of rainforests in Indonesia, to at least secure the long-term future for this most vulnerable and beautiful species.
So donations, folks, we will get that information out and also post it on the profile page for this podcast episode. That's really important. I also watched your empathy experiment video, which is on your website, and it said its aim was at giving people insight into the real dangers that tigers face in the wild, and more importantly, how it feels to be in their place, ergo the empathy. I watched it and I found myself becoming extremely emotional. I was, so I guess what I'm saying is, from my viewpoint, the experiment worked because I was very overcome emotionally. And I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about what this project was and what your inspiration was for setting it up.
Yeah, look, I guess why we give and why we care is empathy, connection with other living beings. And that means we feel what they feel.
Yes.
And so, unfortunately, as you know, with our tribal brains, that normally includes a very small group, whether our community, religion, race, or country. And outside of that, we seem to don't have that capacity to expand the love and connectionness outside of that, which worked well for us through our evolution. But it's destroying the planet now. Unless we look after all humans on the planet, and all ecosystems, the planet will not survive. Unless we can have an empathy and love and connection with other living beings, other than humans that share the planet, we will not survive. Because, our capacity to destroy the future of this planet is well beyond the remit of our tribal mind and our effect on the environment that we could have had as we evolved as a tribal species. So the empathy project is a way of seeing if we could connect people to another living being and understand that our actions are not just dry intellectual outcomes, to save a critically endangered species just for the sake wanting to save endangered species, but also to understand that the species we're trying to save and all the biodiversity and humanity in these rainforest ecosystems have feelings, yeah, and and have, just as we do, and deserve the love and respect. And what we also find is the predominantly reason people give is because they care. Yeah, and then the intellect follows that, and and tries to make that caring in an effective way that's um, compatible with one's values. But unless we can get people to care and emphasize in the first place, we're often pushing the barrel up a hill, and it's a struggle to get the connection um, and the volume of people who are concerned before it's too late for the Sumatran tiger.
Thought it was a wonderful experiment. I highly encourage everyone to go onto your website and check that out. And I know we don't have too much time left, but I was wondering if you could maybe briefly mention your latest project, The Forest for People. And then if we have time, or at a later time, I should say, maybe we can talk about that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, The Forest for People is our latest project. And so I recently started the orangutan project, and what I was say to people, orangutans may have been the center of my love, but never the boundary of it. It was always intended to be, as we talked about earlier, the umbrella species. And what we found, the elephants and tigers were falling outside an umbrella, so we had to start a specific project to bring those species under our conservation. But the third species which were falling out was the indigenous community, humanity. They also had their ancestral land taken away from them by the big multinationals, and their rights weren't respected or considered in the process. And their forms of subsistence living, slash and burn agriculture and hunter and gathering, which were sustainable over centuries, suddenly become unsustainable because they don't now have the land suitably sized to allow those systems of living to survive. And so for example, the Talak Malak community in the Bukit ecosystem are working to save tigers. Um, they wouldn't name their children until they were 6 years old. They didn't do that because there's no use getting attached to these little suckers because they're probably going to be dead. Most of them didn't die. The children weren't learning well in the small government-run school because they were malnourished. And so we wanted to bring human beings under umbrella conservation. So we started feeding the children. We started educating them, providing scholarships for high school and university, developing agricultural systems under the rainforest canopy to not only allow them to survive, but prosper. Because once these people are educated and have wealth, which is equated to power, they can no longer be a pushover to these large multinationals who are seeking to destroy the rainforest for short-term gain. And so humanity, and especially the local humanity, are an integral piece of the jigsaw puzzle to not only to help them survive and prosper now, for and that's a welfare issue, yeah, but to allow them to have the education and prosperity, which will then secure these ecosystems beyond our lifetime.
That's wonderful. I love that. I mean, it's it's pulling all the pieces together, and you take care of the indigenous people, and they will then in turn take care of the wildlife, because it all matters and they all depend on one another. And I think that's just brilliant. And I thank you for sharing that and everything else here with us today. And folks who are listening at home, to find out more about Wildlife Conservation International and the International Tiger Project, Forest for People, and to donate to any and all of them, please visit www.internationaltigerproject.org. And Leif, it's been an honor to have you here with us today, and I hope that we can meet again and maybe talk a little bit further about the Forest for People project that you've been working on. And until next time, everybody, thank you. Leif, thank you. And I look forward to
Thanks.
seeing you again, I hope. Thank you so very much.